In this video, I'm going to give an overview of how to call an activity in Android and then get a result from that activity. Now, I'm not going to show code in this video, I'm just going to do an overview, but I will show code in a few follow-on videos that use this concept. One is Firebase authentication, where you can be within your application and then you can invoke Firebase Auth. Firebase Auth will show a login screen of one type or another and then return to you the authentication result. A few other common uses that we'll take a look at are things like taking a picture with the camera or opening the image gallery. But first, let's explore what this concept is. A little review of some things I talked about earlier in a previous video. One is, what's an intent? It's an abstract description of an operation to be performed. And I never really liked that definition. That's the official Android definition. That's kind of too abstract for me to put a hook on, or too ambiguous. So I think that one's best shown through an example. We'll take a look at an example in just a moment, but first let's think about what we might want to do with an intent. We might want to launch an activity, or an activity could be a screen, either within our app or within another app. We might want to send a broadcast to a receiver, which is a very powerful concept in Android. That's something like when you're using your phone, you're listening to music, you get in your car, you start your car, and then your phone realizes that there's a Bluetooth connection in your car, and your phone automatically starts putting the music through the speakers in your car. That's a broadcast receiver. And then we can also use an intent to start certain services. So we can oftentimes think about intents as matching up to these things that we want them to do. And if you see over here, I have a series of circles that represent intents and a series of essentially donuts that can receive those intents and then do some activity when it receives those intents. So we might see the orange intent go to the orange donut, and that might be our Bluetooth broadcast receiver that pipes the music over to Bluetooth. We might see the green circle go to the green donut, and that will launch a new activity, which is essentially a new screen. And then we might have another intent that causes an offline sync to happen. So you see, we can match these up by color, but that's a similar thing that the Android device is doing, is matching the intent with what it wants to do. So there are two types of intents that we'll often deal with. An explicit intent, where we are calling a specific class by name and saying that's the class that we want to use. This is most commonly used if we want to call an intent within our own application. The other type of intent is an implicit intent, where we just say what we want to do, but not how we want to do it. An example, many times if you open an HTML page in an Android phone, it will give you your choice of browsers to use to view that. Or if you want to play a video, it might use some kind of Google software to do that, or some onboard software, or even your phone's manufacturer's software. I will say I've had a Samsung phone myself for quite a while, and one thing that is a little bit annoying about that is Samsung tends to duplicate everything that is on the phone already. So a lot of times it will give me an option of the Android software to handle this intent or the Samsung equivalent software to handle this intent. So that is essentially an implicit intent that is causing that behavior to happen. So for an intent with a callback, we need to consider three things. First, we need to build the intent itself, which is that concept of we want some behavior to happen. Next, we have to invoke a function called registerForActivityResult. And this is actually going to take two parameters. One I don't have listed here. We'll see it on the next slide, but it's a contract. And the contract essentially says, this is the data I'm passing to the activity, and this is the data that I want to get back from the activity. Could be an int in and a string back or something like that. Now, this is a fairly common design pattern. So there are actually several contracts that are pre-built for us. One's like toggling the camera to take an image. One's like playing video. So we'll see that there are several of these that are predefined, or we can define our own if we wish. Now, after that, we have something that's pretty handy. Note that we have a lambda. And this lambda starts with a parameter called res. Well, that is the lambda that is the callback lambda. In other words, that's the function that will get called when we call our activity and then hear back from that activity. So this is saying, okay, once I've heard back from Google Auth, or Firebase Auth rather, or once I've heard back from the camera, what do I want to do with the data I've received back from that camera or the Firebase auth or whatever it is that we're hearing back from. And remember, we're going to know what type of data we're hearing back based on the contract that we've passed to register for ActivityResult. So we set this up, and then when we are ready to actually launch this activity that's going to return a result to us, that's when we invoke launch. Let's take a look at this with an animation. So we start with our activity, whatever activity we're currently in. Within our activity, we build an intent, which says this is what I want to do. And a lot of times we can pass data with the intent as well. Don't have to, but we can. Next, we invoke the function registerForActivityResult, and we pass to it a contract. Remember, that's the thing that says, here's the data we're passing in, and here's the data we expect to get back from this activity when we hear the callback. And then after that, we have a lambda. And this lambda is the callback function. So in other words, we call to our external activity. When we hear back from it, this lambda is going to be invoked. And you'll notice this lambda accepts a parameter that here I'm calling res. So that's essentially the data we're getting back from our callback, the data we're getting back from that activity that we're calling. I'm storing it here in res, and we know that type is going to be defined in our contract. So we take all this and we assign it to the variable foo. Now this is just setting up that framework. It's not actually invoking the other activity that we want to call just yet. To invoke the activity that we want to call, we call launch on the variable that we defined up here, the variable that we assigned the result of this function to. But when we call launch, we need to pass it something. And what are we going to pass it? Well, we're going to pass it the intent. And remember, the circle going into the donut, that's effectively what we're initiating here is we're saying, this is the circle. This is the intent that says, I want to do something. Now go find a match to do what I want it to do. So that intent is going to go off, and more than likely, it's going to fire off another activity. This is a new screen that the user is going to see. Consider the examples that I gave already. Toggling the camera. The new screen you're going to see is the camera viewfinder. Opening the image gallery. The new view you're going to see is an image gallery. All of your images, kind of like looking at your images right on your phone. Consider Firebase auth. That new activity you're going to see is going to be the Firebase auth login screen, or the selector screen that says, do you want to sign in with email, with Google, with Yahoo, with Twitter, with Microsoft, with GitHub, so on and so forth. It's going to be a screen that's given to us by, in some cases, an external application, which is great. Let's let them do the work for us. Let's not try and reinvent the wheel. So we invoke the application, and then the user interacts with that. And then when the user is finished, say in the case of a logon, the user has logged on, then we're going to hear back. So we get our result, and what happens to the result? Where does it go? It goes right back to that lambda that we defined when we invoked the function registerForActivityResult. So you see that there are a lot of moving pieces that are working together, but at the end, we're going to end up with one piece that we put together in essentially 3 lines plus a little bit of extra stuff we might need to put together to handle the result, to add to the intent, but the structure is very basic. And that's great, because with just a few lines of code, we can call something that already exists, which means, number 1, we can make our app a lot quicker because we have less code to write. Number 2, we can do a quality job of it, because these things that we're calling, Firebase auth, camera, image gallery, so on and so forth, have already been tested and have been tested over time with the test of time. So people have used them and people have worked out the bugs. Anytime we write something from scratch, we have that chance of introducing new bugs that we haven't even discovered yet. So we can write our apps quicker, and we can write them in a higher quality manner. We can use this with external features. We can also use it with internal features that we want to write, or even libraries that we write and share among our own apps. So this has been a look at how to call an activity and get a result in Android. As always, I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.